This is Lisa Miller and Associates, Florida Insurance Roundup, your podcast on the people, issues, and regulations shaping Florida's insurance market. Now, here's Lisa Miller.
Welcome, friends. 9 months after Florida's back-to-back hurricanes Helene and Milton, the insurance claims are revealing the growing amount of uninsured damage from the storms. The Florida Office of Insurance Regulation, who does a terrific job of keeping us all informed about claims, closing, what's open, what the total claim counts are, has just released its June 10th data, and it's been updated since last November. And if you look at the data on the OIR website, a combined total of more than 500,000 claims have been filed, with the data showing that 56% of those Helene residential claims have been closed without payment, and about 43% of Milton claims have been closed without payment, which would make you scratch your head, I'm sure. The majority, though, of those unpaid claims were due to flood damage not covered under a homeowner's policy, or the damage was below the policy's deductible. And specifically, about 59% of Helene and 48% for Milton. And when you figure in a lack of coverage for all other reasons, and those are all listed, there's about 17 reason categories on the OIR website for closed claims without payment. Those percentages jump to 79% for Helene and 71% for Milton. So for our regular listeners and our great newsletter readers, you may remember the controversy this past fall created by trial attorneys and Weiss Ratings. They accused Florida's property insurance companies and executives of, including Citizens, they put Citizens in this bucket, of just saying they're not paying claims, and that the market was in a state of collapse because of it, which was nothing further from the truth. If you missed it, you can listen to our podcast, episode 54, where we set the record straight and continue to do that. And as it turned out, that campaign of insinuation was part of a legislative effort that followed in the Florida House of Representatives to try to repeal the property insurance reforms that have been so successful and that were passed in 22 and 2023. Those reforms are widely credited, including by regulators, of helping Florida's insurance market recover and putting us on a path of lower rates. And I'd love to give a shout out to Representative Mike Caruso, who follows our work, who told us that his commercial residential policy for his condo units decreased $10,000 from last year to this year. So we appreciate Representative Caruso's leadership for telling us that. We're not going to regurgitate that podcast nor counter what those that say and levy these false arguments, but you can likely expect them to take this current updated data that just came out earlier this month and head to the mountaintop and talk about it in the January session that starts, just a few months from now. So on today's podcast, again, I'm going to give you the cold, hard truth so that you are armed with the real news and the real takeaway and relevance of this updated data from Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, and the implications for this season that we expect to be pretty brutal as we embark upon it this month going forward. So joining us, I thought I would get the perspective of a seasoned insurance agent and a seasoned claims executive who are on the front lines pre and post storm. And we have Lee Wiglesworth, president of Wiglesworth-Rindom Insurance Agency in Stuart, Florida, beautiful Stuart, Florida. He's got more than 20 years of industry experience, and he and his team have been recognized by the Insurance Journal, as well as receiving multiple community awards for their excellence in service and leadership. And Lee is a leader with the Professional Insurance Agents of Florida, which is an incredible organization helping set public policy, and has several insurance carrier advisory councils that he is a strategic advisor. So welcome, Lee. Glad you're here.
Thanks, Lisa. Happy to be here. And thanks for having me.
Sure. And also joining us is Fraser Hudson, CEO of Lozano Insurance Adjusters, who has been a strategic partner for Citizens Property Insurance in their claims arena for over 20 years. And they're out of St. Pete, and they are a multi-line adjusting firm handling all types of catastrophes as well as daily claims. And besides adjusting claims, it has a claims management system. They do appraisal, mediation, staffing, a full complement of services in Florida, and they do work in Texas. He's the former director of catastrophe operations for one of our great insurance companies, Frontline Insurance Company, and his greatest calling, and that we're so appreciative of, was his career in the U.S. Navy, where he was a commanding officer of the submarine USS Missouri. So thank you for your service, Fraser, and for being on our program.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you about these important topics today.
Thank you. And Lee, I'm going to start with you. I'm sure when you saw these June 10th numbers, you're scratching your head as well with these closed claims without payments, but I know you dug into the data. What implications, what's your perspective about these numbers so that we can set the record straight before others try to set a record that isn't true?
What stands out to me is, one, we have too many residents without flood insurance. And if you just have hurricane coverage on your homeowners policy without flood insurance, you're not fully covered for a hurricane. I also know that homeowners don't fully understand their coverages, their policy, or how their deductible works. And that, three, we as agents, we need to do a better job of educating and explaining and working past some of those misconceptions.
And when you have conversations, Lee, with your policyholders and you and your team, push hard for them to buy flood insurance.
Mhm.
I have flood insurance and I live in an X zone, which are those crazy FEMA maps that say I'll never flood. I don't believe it, because more often than not, we are seeing people that live in these quote never flood zones flood. There's tons of articles out there about that. What are some of the arguments that you make or try to persuade your consumers that maybe they don't want to go put the granite countertops in their house and save that money, to try to buy coverage that they really need? What do you say?
First, let us provide you a quote. There's more and more companies coming out. There's more than just the federal National Flood Insurance Program to get the federal policy. So a lot of times I think there's a misconception of the cost. The other is, you're getting advice from your neighbors who say it's never flooded here, your mortgage company who's saying you don't need flood insurance. You don't need it until you do. The NFIP reports only 13% of properties in Florida have flood insurance. So that's 87% of homeowners, again, not fully covered for a hurricane. We pay exorbitant amounts of money for wind coverage, for wind damage that could destroy our roofs, damage our homes. And we have nothing for some of the most costly damages that we've seen in recent hurricanes, for rising water, storm surge, oversaturation. So it's just educating those household consumers on that, and that for $500 you could have $250,000 coverage on there. I also tell them, for me personally, I'm like you, Lisa, I'm in that flood zone X. My home is newer, it's been elevated, but for $500 to have an inch of water coming through my floors and have that on there, I would be more afraid of my wife and trying to explain to her that I didn't purchase for $500 all her floors being replaced than I would actually the flood. And that's enough for me to transfer that risk to an insurance company.
Well said. And I'd like to kind of get Fraser's perspective. Fraser, tell the audience what you've been doing for the past few years, and particularly as a director of catastrophe claims. And what have you seen? What's the commentary of policyholders when they realize they don't have flood? And also talk about what you believe is the best way to make sure you have enough coverage should the big one come.
Okay, Lisa, great question. And first of all, I agree completely with Lee that if it rains where you live, particularly in Florida, where flat topography, the water doesn't drain, you need to have flood insurance. I live in an X zone. I have flood insurance, like Lee said, for $500 a year. I know that if the worst case happens, I have at least $250,000 in coverage to help rebuild. And I would be terrified of telling my wife why I chose not to do that and go bare. Um, you know, what we see out in the field, in the last year working at Lozano, or in the prior years working CAT at Frontline, is the homeowners that didn't understand that flood wasn't covered by their homeowners policies. Many of them mistakenly believe that the flood the storm surge, the catastrophic rain was all caused by a hurricane, and they're covered by a hurricane. So therefore, they should be covered under their homeowner's policy. But the reality is, when the rain hits the ground, when the waters rise from the rivers, or when the waves from the storm surge come in, the resulting damages are excluded under most of your homeowner's insurance policies. And so the biggest reaction that we get is regret from our homeowners who have that flood damage. And yes, 2 inches of water in your home isn't as scary as 10 feet of storm surge coming in. However, 2 inches of water is going to damage your floors, it can damage your walls, damage your cabinets, damage your furniture, and you could very easily end up $100,000 in debt, having to pay for all that out of pocket when you could have paid $500 a year to be covered.
And I have a private flood insurance policy. I chose not to go with NFIP because the coverage was better. There's about OIR shows 30 some odd companies that are in that private flood insurance space. Lee, I want to throw it back to you. Could you tell us the difference that you see, some of the couple of major differences between the private flood policies and the NFIP policies?
The NFIP policy, which is National Flood Insurance Program under FEMA, has a base federally subsidized policy that has limits of what you can obtain. So the limit for the federal policy is $250,000 for the dwelling, $100,000 for your contents. You do have some deductible options, but there's very little of anything else. And I think what we've seen in Hurricane Ian, Hurricane Helene is that when those events happen, there's a lot of other coverages that you need. So a lot of the private carriers will let you extend much more loss of use. And talking to some of my partners on the West Coast, if you're out of your home because it came off the foundation for 18 months to 2 years, that loss of use coverage they're seeing over there is extremely important. And that's additional coverage that private offers that you cannot receive on there. Also, you can extend with private options those coverage limits. So if you are in a very high risk zone where you're not worried about, like us in flood zone X, a few inches of water, but you're worried about total losses, you can extend that coverage to cover your full property, just like it's covered on your homeowner's policy.
That's very helpful. You know, when we talk about underinsured, you see that term a lot. A lot of the press stories, they use the word underinsured, or they'll say an insurance company isn't paying. And I try so hard to work with some of the great journalists that are in this market to make sure that they talk about, a flood insurance company or NFIP and a property homeowners insurance company. I mean, in my humble opinion, and you may call me biased, the Florida's insurance companies have done a really good job of handling these hurricane claims. And if you look at the new OR data in the past 7 months, insurance companies have reduced the number of Helene's open claims without payment from about 14,000 to 2,000, and they've reduced Milton's from about 108,000 to 12,000. So that's great progress. And of course, some of these claims can be very complex. They may have third parties that delay getting the claims because it's in the best interest of the third party getting the claim resolved. Fraser, from your standpoint, we've heard that claim counts are down because of the reforms, and that this storm season we may have a tough time finding adjusters who may have had to leave this profession and go work on a construction site or go find another profession because the work is just not there. What do you think are the best things we can do as an industry to be ready for what we believe is an active storm season in 2025? And maybe even talk about some of the new and more efficient claims technology that you've seen to more quickly get to the policyholder and get to a resolution as quickly as possible. Give us your expertise on that, Fraser.
Well, first of all, Lisa, I'd like to comment on the numbers that you just quoted that Florida OIR put out in June, that I think it's a tremendous difference from how Florida carriers have had to deal with claims from 2022 and earlier. Only having 10% of the claims open less than a year from an event is significant. You look at the quicker responses that carriers brought. Carriers are being held more accountable for their performance now, and it's obvious that they responded. They overstaffed for Milton to be able to do it. Plus, they had a new statute that reduced the amount of time that they had to address claims from 90 days down to 60 days, as long as there were no factors outside of their control. But on top of that, the legislative changes have had the most dramatic impact. The removal of the one-way fee for attorneys, that went into effect in March of 2023. So it was after Ian. And if you go and you look at OIR's data for Ian that was published in March of this year, there are still 20% of the Ian claims in Broward County open and 25% of the Ian claims in Miami-Dade that are still open. And Ian was almost 3 years ago and really did not have much of an impact in Miami-Dade or Broward. You compare that with the 10% that are open for Milton and Helene today, only 10 months post-storm. It really indicates to me that the removal of the one-way attorney fees has disincentivized those frivolous lawsuits that tend to keep claims open. And another thing that really hasn't been talked about much is the removal of AOBs. The assignment of benefits went away in January of 2023. And so even if a policyholder's claim is resolved, there may still be an assignment of benefits that somebody else owns part of that claim and has kept the claim open in dispute with the carrier. I remember at Frontline, as we reached the 3-year statute of limitations from Irma and the 2 months leading up to it, we received hundreds of new claims from AOBs as they were trying to rush to get those claims filed before the statute of limitations came in. And I just don't think we're going to see the same thing with Milton and Helene because of the lack of AOBs and the removal of the one-way fee statute. So I think all very positive. To your other part of your question about what technology is out there, as we see some adjusters are retiring out of the business, some may be looking for new jobs elsewhere because of the claims counts have gone down. And really, the tech needs to be applied to make your adjusters more efficient and make them more accurate. And I was just at a claims tech conference up in New York where I had a chance to see some of the newest stuff that's out there. And I was really impressed with a company that had developed a chat bot, but not like your text chat bot that you're used to seeing online. This is one that actually interacted with you on a voice phone call, and it would pick up whatever language you spoke, would respond in your language. So it didn't matter if you were speaking in Spanish, if you're speaking in Portuguese, it identified it, it responded in the appropriate language and would transcribe all of that for the claims adjusters down the road. It had the ability to dispatch mitigation and would do all of the first notice of loss. And the beauty of that is you have trained that one AI chatbot. Well, now when the person calls in their claim, they don't have to wait for an hour on hold or wait for a callback from someone because it's a computer answering. You can have 1,000 of those chatbots going at the same time, filing claims and getting the claims out to the field, which is usually ready to respond faster than your desk adjusters are because they're already deploying in advance of the storm. Another neat technology I saw and had a chance to sample was letter writing. This is one of the things that slows down your desk adjusters on processing claims is they are manually writing their coverage letters, their request for information letters. And there was a company that had an AI system that when you downloaded all the policy forms, we would provide it just a copy of a deck page, a copy of the field adjusters report, and a copy of the estimate. And it would then draft the letter knowing the addresses. So none of these things that desk adjusters have to manually type in before, and would fill it all out for them and would highlight in a different color, here's the stuff that we tailored from the policy language that the desk adjuster needs to review, putting the desk adjuster more in a review, always having a human touch on the claim, but helping them be more efficient at processing. And so those are some of the things I saw that I think that carriers need to embrace to be more efficient, to meet the new timelines for the Florida claims handling statutes, as well as getting money to the policyholders faster. As far as policyholders getting ready for hurricane season, because like you said at the beginning of this, it's predicted to be an above average season. I would take a look at your trees, trim your trees. Branches are going to break in your storms, and you can avoid some of the damage that happens to your home by just trimming away the trees that are over your home. And if you have dead trees in your yard, don't wait for the storm, have them removed now, because those are the ones most likely to fall over. Clear your rain gutters, have a plan. Where are you going to go? How are you going to get there? And if you have pets, don't forget to consider them and where you're going to evacuate. Get a copy of your homeowners and your flood policies or your deck pages so you know where your coverages are and how to file claims, and put those with your important papers that if you evacuate, you're going to leave with them. And if you don't have flood insurance and you're in Florida, consider getting it now. Call Lee to get that quote. You'll be surprised if you're not in a high risk zone, how inexpensive that risk transfer can be for you. And then
Excellent.
document your, yeah,
Excellent. Documented. Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you for that, Fraser.
Document your home with photos that'll help you with the before pictures. If the worst happens and you come back and there's nothing there, you can at least show what was there, and it'll help you in the claim process. And the last thing is heed the warnings from the officials. If you're in a mandatory evacuation area, leave and do not return until they say it's safe. Your life and the safety of your family are the absolute most important things. For the rest of the stuff, you have insurance.
Yes, and for the rest of the stuff, you have insurance, and I'm going to let Lee talk to us about ways we know we have enough insurance. One of the things I said on a recent interview with the media, when they asked me how much is enough for homeowners insurance. And, in homeowners insurance, our agent helps us determine what it would cost to replace our home if it were flattened. The wind just blew it down. I'll let Lee talk about the ways they do that, but then a real good trick that he even recommends by talking to a contractor. Lee?
Yeah. So on knowing how much coverage you need, that's the common question. Is this enough coverage? It puts all your agents listening to this, it puts us in a tough position because we're not contractors. We're not licensed adjusters. We do have tools that are provided by the companies, replacement cost calculation tools. But really, it's having a conversation with the customer, having them think we need to insure the home to 100% replacement cost. Meaning, if that home were completely destroyed, if there was a fire, that we could remove debris and build that house back up from the slab up. Whether you think your house will be totally destroyed or not, that's what most of our companies require: 100% replacement cost. As agents, we've got to be really careful that we're not manipulating that one tool that we have to try to determine what it would cost for someone to rebuild their house just to get a competitive edge on price. We've got to go through that with diligence. I like our team going through those items line by line, room by room. What type of flooring, what type of countertops, what type of cabinetry is in there. And then that whole time explaining it to that homeowner, that prospect, or that insured, of why we're doing this and why it's in their best interest to be properly insured. So many consumers, they view insurance as a commodity, that they're all the same, and let's find the lowest price, and you're an independent agent, so you can shop them all, give me the lowest. And us as agents and our offices have also done I think a disservice of thinking that's all they want, that's all they care about. So let me put this through a comparative rater. Here's my cheapest price. And insurance is not something that you necessarily always want the cheapest of. You need to be asking what your coverage limits are, what you're insured for. What we will do is we'll go through the replacement cost calculation with them. That will give a little peace of mind that we're not missing anything. But to truly know, because we are not contractors, you need to have somebody else go out there. There's companies that will do full appraisals, especially when you're dealing with some higher value properties, 1 million, 3 million. Don't put that exposure on yourself as an agency of underinsuring that home, because that is the worst time you want to be explaining to a client that they don't have coverage or they don't have enough coverage, is when they're standing in a loss situation. So insurance isn't a fun way to spend money. We've written tens of thousands of insurance policies. I never look at one and say, man, that's a good looking policy. I don't leave it in a parking lot and turn back to check on it as I lock it up. I don't get to watch the Super Bowl on it. It's not fun, but it's so important to have that coverage there. And we as agents are there to protect those assets and explain it. If the customer continues not to have importance on it, then that's documented. You educated them, you did your part. Do not assume the customer always wants the cheapest thing.
Thank you for that, Lee. And to bring this in for a landing, the purpose of this podcast is to be proactive, to be ready to refute the naysayers that are going to talk about unpaid claims. and they're not going to qualify it with the 17 reasons they were unpaid, closed without payment, whatever those codes are that OIR has so brilliantly scripted and forced the insurance companies to report, and they audit that data. So it's auditable and verified data, so that we as the insurance industry, and whether you're a policyholder, agent, contractor, realtor, whoever's listening to this podcast, know the truth. And nothing is more important than, if you want to know and see the data I'm talking about, it is as simple as going to www.floir.com. We'll put this in the show notes. You click on Hurricane Helene or Hurricane Milton or any of the other ones, and you scroll down. You'll miss it if you just look at the top of the screen. And there are those 17 reason codes as to why claims have not been paid. And I just want those of you that are listening to be armed with the truth. And I'm not going to stand, or neither are you, for people skirting the truth or trying to allege that things are not being done right. Certainly, insurance companies will even admit to anyone listening that they make mistakes. They may miss things. With the new AI technology, as Fraser's been talking about, it'll make us more efficient. It'll make us faster, better, more responsive. Letter writing, of course, I chuckled, Fraser, as I read and work with a lot of youth in the state. I do a lot of mentorship, and many of them struggle with how to write. So I can imagine what would happen if they're sitting on a claims desk and having to write a letter. So I'd like to thank our incredible guest today, Fraser Hudson, a decorated Navy vet that has served our country honorably and is now serving the insurance industry as well with Lozano Insurance Adjusting. He's the CEO and has done a great job of talking about all things claims. Thank you, Fraser.
Lisa, my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And of course, Lee Wigglesworth, just all things on the front end when it comes to getting the coverage right, making sure he can lobby, if you will, his policyholders to buy flood insurance, and of course, buy enough on your homeowners insurance with the Wiglesworth-Rindom Insurance Agency out of Stuart. Thank you for being here, Lee.
Lisa, again, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
As we've learned today in this growing number of storms, and they're more severe, is that we are showing the numbers of what is happening when claims are not paid. And we're showing you what happens when someone is underinsured. And when I say underinsured, I mean no flood insurance or not enough coverage on your homeowner's policy. And those two things come under the heading of underinsured. And we know Florida is target rich for these huge catastrophes. And even in non-hurricane season, when we see 21 inches of rain falling in Broward County in a day or 2 days, it's in few hours for that matter. We're surrounded by warm water. Again, I have to remind all of you, largest number of miles of coastline in the lower 48 states. We are an island in the water, and it's so evident. And if you look at what Hurricane Ian did, it was the costliest storm in our state's history, and the third costliest in U.S. history, with over $112 billion in total damages, with $21 billion in claims. We pray that there's not a repeat of that this season. I do track what the Division of Emergency Management does, and our incredible leader for that organization, Kevin Guthrie, as our state's emergency manager. And he and I have talked. You see his postings on LinkedIn. They're preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. Please reach out to us. Be ready for what you see in the news or on TV shows, etc., and alert me when you see people alleging insurance companies aren't paying claims, or you see the worst of the worst out there. And I'd like to reach out to those media contacts and set the record straight. So let me hear from you. Give me your experience. Tell me what your experience has been and what we can do to improve this marketplace, to tell the truth that we know as professionals in this industry. We want to hear from you, our tremendous listeners. You can call us and leave a message at our phone number, 850-388-8002, or send me an email. I love hearing from you that way. Lisa Miller at lisamillerassociates.com. Follow us, if you would, on our social media accounts. We're on LinkedIn. We have a Facebook page. We're on X, and hit like and follow on your favorite podcast platform so you won't miss a future episode. Make sure to share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want to stay in the know, be sure to go to our website, www.lisamillerassociates.com, and you can sign up for our free newsletter and notifications about these podcasts. This has been a labor of love for our firm for going on a dozen years as a free service in the marketplace. And I hear from people around the world, reinsurers, and I heard from Holland the other day. I don't know how my newsletter got there. We had done something on flood. So just keep up the good work of getting our word out to the marketplace and around the world. And so that's it for this Florida Insurance Roundup episode. I appreciate you being a part of it, for listening to it. And remember, at our firm, Lisa Miller and Associates, we have a passion for policy and our clients' success and the industry's success. I'm Lisa Miller, and until next time, stay safe, Florida.
This has been Lisa Miller and Associates Florida Insurance Roundup, your podcast on the people, issues, and regulations shaping Florida's insurance market. For more information on today's program, please visit us on the web at www.lisamillerassociates.com.